December 15, 1958, Point Barrow, Alaska. Technical Sergeant Harold Watson adjusts his headphones inside DUW line station POW3, staring at an oscilloscope display that should be showing nothing, the 165 MHz frequency band, a range every radar operator ignores because it's supposed to be empty radio silence, dead air. But Watson sees something impossible. Distinctive harmonic patterns pulsing across his screen like electronic fingerprints. Soviet Tu-95 Bear bombers are 8 hours away from American airspace, invisible to every conventional radar system protecting North America. The DW line, America's $8 billion electronic shield stretching 3,000 miles across the Arctic, shows clear skies. No contacts, no threats. But Watson's frequency trick is revealing something that will change the Cold War forever. Those massive Soviet bombers, equipped with the most advanced propulsion technology in the world, have been broadcasting their exact location across thousands of miles without realizing it. Every approach, every formation, every flight path. One radar operator's curiosity about empty frequencies was about to reveal every Soviet bomber approaching American airspace. If you value forgotten Cold War secrets, make sure to subscribe. We uncover the classified breakthroughs that shaped history. Drop your location in the comments below. Technical Sergeant Harold Watson settled into his metal chair at DW Line Station POW3, the familiar hum of electronics filling the cramped operations room as December's Arctic darkness pressed against the frost-covered windows. At 28, Watson had spent enough 12-hour shifts in this electronic fortress to know every sound the equipment made, the steady pulse of the ANFPS-19 radar rotating outside, the soft whir of cooling fans, the occasional crackle of radio chatter from other stations along the 3,000-mile defensive line. What he heard tonight was different. The oscilloscope screen glowed green in the dim light, displaying the electromagnetic spectrum that most operators never bothered to monitor. While his colleagues focused on the prescribed X-band frequencies between 8 and 12 gigahertz, the standard range for target acquisition, Watson methodically scanned everything from 50 megahertz to 300 megahertz during his overnight watches. His supervisors had noticed this quirky habit 3 months ago when he first arrived at Point Barrow, but they considered it harmless. The DUW line's mission was clear. Detect Soviet bombers when conventional radar painted them at 200 miles out, then relay coordinates to NORAD's command center inside Cheyenne Mountain. Watson adjusted the frequency dial to 165 megahertz and immediately saw the anomaly, a series of harmonic spikes that shouldn't exist in what was supposed to be an empty band. The patterns looked almost organic, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat captured on an electrocardiogram. He'd been a radio technician for 3 years before radar school, spending countless hours listening to atmospheric interference, solar radiation effects, and electromagnetic noise from everything from thunderstorms to shortwave broadcasts from Siberian mining operations. This was something entirely different. The sergeant reached for his logbook and began documenting the signal characteristics. Frequency range 165 to 167 megahertz, harmonic intervals of approximately 12 hertz, signal strength varying between -40 and -60 decibels. The patterns appeared to be propagating from the northwest, roughly the direction of Soviet air bases in Chukotka and Kamchatka. Watson had memorized the locations of every known airfield within 2,000 miles of Alaska during his intelligence briefings. The Soviets operated long-range aviation units from Providenia, Anadyr, and Magadan, flying their massive Tu-95 Bear bombers on regular patrol missions that probed American air defenses. What puzzled Watson was the timing. His conventional radar showed empty skies, no contacts anywhere within 400 miles. According to standard doctrine, Soviet bombers approaching North American airspace would first appear as tiny blips on his primary display when they crossed the radar horizon. The electromagnetic signatures he was monitoring suggested something was out there, but his proven detection systems registered nothing. Watson stood and walked to the coffee pot, his breath visible in the cold air despite the heating system running constantly. The dew line stations were marvels of Cold War engineering, self-contained electronic fortresses designed to operate in temperatures that dropped to 50 below zero. Each facility housed 24 personnel working around the clock, maintaining radar equipment worth millions of dollars and communications gear that could reach NORAD headquarters in seconds. But the technology was only as good as the operators who understood how to use it. He returned to his station and continued monitoring the mysterious signals. The harmonic patterns were becoming stronger, more defined, as if whatever was generating them was moving closer to his position. Watson began sketching the waveforms in his logbook, noting how the frequency signatures seemed to have individual characteristics, some patterns showing slightly different harmonic intervals, others displaying unique amplitude variations. It was almost as if he could distinguish between different sources. The breakthrough came at 0300 hours when Watson's conventional radar finally painted contacts. Two aircraft approaching from the northwest at 300 miles range, altitude 40,000 feet, speed 400 knots. The radar signature matched known characteristics of Soviet Tu-95 bombers, large, slow-moving aircraft with distinctive radar cross-sections. But Watson realized something extraordinary. The electromagnetic patterns he'd been monitoring for the past 6 hours matched perfectly with the bomber formation his conventional radar had just detected. Watson stared at his dual displays, the oscilloscope showing electromagnetic signatures that had appeared hours earlier, and the radar screen now tracking two Soviet bears exactly where the frequency analysis had predicted they would be. He grabbed his calculator and began working the mathematics. If the electromagnetic signatures had appeared at 2100 hours and conventional radar contact occurred at 0300 hours, that meant his frequency monitoring had provided 6 hours of advance warning. He picked up the secure telephone connecting him to Master Sergeant Rodriguez at the Sector Operations Center. Rodriguez had 15 years of radar experience and commanded respect throughout the DEW line network for his technical expertise and steady leadership during crisis situations. If anyone would understand the implications of Watson's discovery, it would be Rodriguez. The phone rang 3 times before Rodriguez answered with his characteristic gruff professionalism. Watson explained what he'd observed, the electromagnetic patterns, the timing correlation, the potential for extended early warning. Rodriguez listened without interruption, then asked Watson to transmit his oscilloscope readings and radar plots through secure teletype. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez called back with instructions that would change everything. Continue monitoring the 165 MHz band, document every signal correlation with conventional radar contacts, and prepare a detailed technical report for Colonel Mitchell at sector headquarters. The discovery that would revolutionize Cold War air defense had begun with one curious radar operator who refused to ignore empty frequencies that weren't supposed to contain anything at all. Watson spent the following weeks methodically documenting every correlation between his electromagnetic signatures and subsequent Soviet bomber movements. His logbook filled with precise entries. January 3rd, harmonic patterns at 166 MHz followed 7 hours later by 3 Tu-95s approaching Iceland. January 9th, distinctive frequency spikes predicting a 4-aircraft formation that materialized over northern Canada exactly when his calculations suggested. By the end of January, Watson had achieved 23 successful predictions with an average advance warning time of 7.2 hours. The technical mechanism behind his discovery became clearer with each observation. Watson realized that the Tu-95's revolutionary contra-rotating propeller system, 2 massive 8-blade propellers spinning in opposite directions at 750 revolutions per minute, was creating electromagnetic chaos that Soviet engineers had never anticipated. The interaction between the propeller discs, rotating at slightly different speeds due to mechanical tolerances inherent in any rotating machinery, generated harmonic interference patterns as unique as human fingerprints. What made the electromagnetic emissions particularly detectable was the propeller blade tip speed. Each blade tip moved at 575 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound, creating shock waves that propagated electromagnetic energy across vast distances in specific frequency bands. The Soviet Union's most advanced strategic bomber was inadvertently broadcasting its presence across thousands of miles of electromagnetic spectrum that American radar operators had never thought to monitor. Watson's analysis revealed something even more remarkable. He could distinguish individual aircraft within formations based on their distinct harmonic signatures. Each 295's engines operated with microscopic timing differences, variations measured in milliseconds that created unique electromagnetic voice prints. Aircraft tail number 782 consistently showed harmonic intervals of 11.7 Hz, while aircraft 415 displayed patterns at 12.3 Hz. Watson could count formation sizes, predict flight paths based on signal strength variations, and even estimate altitude changes by analyzing frequency Doppler shifts. The breakthrough that convinced his skeptical supervisors came during a major Soviet training exercise on February 21st. Watson detected massive electromagnetic signatures suggesting 12 aircraft launching simultaneously from bases in Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, the largest formation he'd ever monitored. His calculations indicated the bombers would approach British and Icelandic airspace in approximately 8 hours, flying at cruising altitude between 35,000 and 42,000 feet. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had initially dismissed Watson's frequency monitoring as atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction. The DEW line represented $8 billion of proven radar technology, deployed across 63 stations and manned by 25,000 personnel, operating the most sophisticated air defense network ever constructed. The idea that radio noise could provide better intelligence than conventional radar systems challenged everything Rodriguez had learned during 15 years of military service spanning World War II and Korea. But Rodriguez was also a professional who understood that war meant adapting to unexpected developments. When Watson's electromagnetic signatures predicted the February 21st exercise with pinpoint accuracy, 12 295s approaching exactly when and where the frequency analysis indicated, Rodriguez immediately contacted Colonel James Mitchell at DEW Line Sector Headquarters. Mitchell brought a unique perspective to evaluating Watson's discovery. As a former B-52 pilot with over 2,000 hours of strategic bomber experience, Mitchell understood both the capabilities and vulnerabilities of large aircraft operations. His background in electronic warfare systems gave him the technical knowledge to appreciate the significance of electromagnetic emissions from rotating machinery. Most importantly, Mitchell recognized that Soviet bomber doctrine relied on surprise approaches that exploited the limited range of conventional radar detection. The colonel authorized installation of Watson's frequency analysis protocol at 3 additional DEW line stations, POW-1 at Barter Island, POW-2 at Alektok Point, and POW-4 at Wainwright. Each station received modified oscilloscopes capable of monitoring the 150 to 175 MHz frequency range, along with detailed instructions for correlating electromagnetic signatures with subsequent radar contacts. Initial results exceeded Mitchell's expectations. Station POW-1 achieved 91% accuracy in predicting Soviet bomber approaches over a 3-week period. POW-2 successfully tracked formation changes and altitude variations that conventional radar missed until aircraft came within standard detection range. POW-4 demonstrated the ability to distinguish between different Soviet aircraft types based on propeller characteristics, 295 Bears showing the distinctive contra-rotating signatures, while older 24 Bulls displayed conventional single propeller patterns. By May, Mitchell had equipped 21 primary DEW line stations with Watson's electromagnetic detection capability. The system provided NORAD with unprecedented early warning of Soviet strategic bomber operations throughout the Arctic approaches to North America. Air Defense Command headquarters at Colorado Springs received intelligence summaries showing Soviet flight patterns, formation sizes, and approach vectors hours before conventional radar systems could detect the same aircraft. The strategic implications were revolutionary. NORAD could now place interceptor squadrons on alert status based on electromagnetic intelligence, positioning F-102 Delta Daggers and F-106 Delta Darts along predicted approach routes hours before Soviet bombers appeared on conventional radar screens. Strategic Air Command gained sufficient warning time to launch airborne alert missions, dispersing nuclear-armed B-52s to secondary airfields before potential Soviet attacks could target primary bases. Watson's frequency detection transformed Soviet bomber operations from surprise threats, requiring immediate response to predictable activities that American air defense forces could anticipate and counter with overwhelming superiority. The electromagnetic signatures that Soviet engineers never realized their advanced propulsion technology was generating had given the United States a decisive strategic advantage in the most critical theater of Cold War confrontation, the defense of North American airspace against nuclear attack. Colonel Mitchell's confidence in Watson's electromagnetic detection system reached its peak during the third week of May when NORAD headquarters authorized implementation across the entire northern tier of air defense installations. The frequency monitoring protocol expanded beyond the dew line to include pine tree line stations across Canada and strategic radar sites in Greenland and Iceland. For the first time since the Soviet Union developed strategic bombing capabilities, American air defense commanders possessed comprehensive early warning coverage extending from the Bering Strait to the North Atlantic. The system's effectiveness became legendary among NORAD operations staff at Cheyenne Mountain. Soviet Tu-95 formations launching from Olnya or Semipalatinsk appeared on Watson's frequency analyzers while still climbing to cruising altitude over Siberian airspace. Air Defense Command could track individual aircraft through their entire approach profiles, initial climb phases showing strengthening electromagnetic signatures, cruise segments displaying steady harmonic patterns, and descent preparations marked by subtle frequency variations as pilots reduced engine power settings. General Frank Hayes, NORAD's operations director, initially approached Watson's discovery with institutional caution that reflected decades of military experience managing complex technological systems. Hayes had overseen the transition from post-World War II fighter intercept operations to integrated radar missile networks protecting continental airspace. He understood that revolutionary capabilities often came with hidden vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit once they understood American detection methods. Hayes authorized controlled testing of the electromagnetic detection system during June, limiting knowledge of the frequency monitoring capability to fewer than 200 personnel across the entire continental air defense network. Soviet bomber approaches during this period followed predictable patterns, single aircraft or small formations conducting routine reconnaissance missions along established flight corridors that rarely penetrated deeper than international airspace boundaries. The crisis that would test Watson's system beyond all previous limits began developing during the first week of August, when Soviet long-range aviation units at Murmansk and Arkhangelsk began intensive flight operations involving unprecedented numbers of aircraft. Watson's frequency monitoring stations detected electromagnetic signatures suggesting massive formations launching simultaneously from multiple airfields, patterns unlike anything recorded during 10 months of operational testing. On August 15th, Watson's oscilloscopes registered electromagnetic chaos across the entire 150 to 180 MHz spectrum. The harmonic signatures suggested 40-plus aircraft airborne simultaneously, with additional formations launching every 2 hours in what appeared to be the largest Soviet strategic bomber exercise in history. The electromagnetic patterns indicated aircraft approaching from multiple vectors, some formations heading toward Alaska, others targeting Iceland and Greenland, with additional groups apparently aimed at northern Canada. NORAD's response reflected the strategic importance American commanders placed on Watson's frequency detection capabilities. Air Defense Command placed all interceptor squadrons on DEFCON 2 alert status, launching F-106 Delta darts from Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska, Keflavik in Iceland, and Goose Bay in Labrador. Strategic Air Command responded by executing Operation Chrome Dome airborne alert procedures, dispersing 180 B-52 Stratofortresses to secondary airfields and maintaining continuous nuclear-armed patrols over predetermined fail-safe routes. The electromagnetic signatures continued for 18 hours, indicating sustained Soviet bomber operations at levels that suggested either a full-scale attack simulation or preparation for actual military action. Watson's frequency analyzers showed formations maintaining cruise altitude and speed consistent with strategic penetration missions rather than routine training flights that typically remained in international airspace. The harmonic patterns suggested aircraft approaching American territorial boundaries from distances that would require several more hours of flight time before conventional radar contact. As NORAD maintained maximum alert status throughout August 16th, a devastating realization began emerging from the Continental Air Defense Network. Conventional radar stations from Alaska to Newfoundland reported empty airspace. No Soviet aircraft appeared on primary or secondary radar displays. The electromagnetic signatures that had triggered the largest American air defense response since the Korean War were not correlating with actual bomber formations approaching North American airspace. Colonel Mitchell was among the first commanders to recognize the implications of the intelligence failure. Soviet engineers had discovered the American frequency detection method and were conducting sophisticated electronic warfare operations designed to exploit Watson's electromagnetic monitoring system. The harmonic signatures that had provided NORAD with unprecedented early warning capabilities for 10 months were being artificially generated to trigger false alarms and exhaust American air defense resources. The revelation that Soviet electronic warfare specialists could replicate Tu-95 propeller signatures using ground-based transmitters represented a catastrophic intelligence compromise. Every successful prediction Watson had achieved, every formation he had tracked, every strategic advantage NORAD had gained through electromagnetic detection had been observed and analyzed by Soviet technical intelligence units. The frequency monitoring system that had revolutionized American air defense had become a weapon Soviet commanders could use to manipulate NORAD's response decisions. Hayes convened an emergency assessment at Cheyenne Mountain to evaluate the strategic implications of the compromised detection system. The August 15th exercise demonstrated that Soviet electronic warfare capabilities could trigger maximum American alert responses without deploying a single actual bomber formation. If continued, such operations could exhaust interceptor squadrons through repeated scrambles, disperse Strategic Air Command nuclear assets away from primary bases, and force NORAD to maintain unsustainable alert postures that degraded overall readiness. Watson found himself at the center of a strategic reversal that transformed his greatest discovery into a potentially fatal vulnerability. The electromagnetic signatures he had pioneered detecting were now controlled by the enemy forces he had been monitoring. The frequency detection system that had given American air defense commanders decisive early warning capabilities had become a conduit for Soviet deception operations designed to paralyze the Continental Defense Network through false intelligence and strategic manipulation. The August deception operation marked the beginning of what intelligence analysts would later classify as the most sophisticated electronic warfare campaign of the Cold War. Soviet technical specialists had not merely discovered Watson's frequency monitoring system, they had reverse-engineered it completely, creating ground-based transmitters capable of replicating every harmonic signature characteristic of Tu-95 contra-rotating propellers. The electromagnetic patterns that had given NORAD unprecedented strategic advantage were now controlled by the enemy they were designed to detect. NORAD's response reflected the catastrophic nature of the intelligence compromise. General Hayes ordered immediate suspension of all frequency-based early warning operations, effectively blinding American air defense to the extended detection capabilities Watson had developed. The Continental Defense Network reverted to conventional radar systems with their inherent limitations, 200-mile detection ranges that provided barely 20 minutes of warning before Soviet bombers could reach strategic targets. Watson spent the weeks following the August crisis analyzing every electromagnetic signature his system had recorded since December. The technical data revealed a disturbing pattern. Soviet electronic warfare specialists had been testing countermeasures since March, gradually introducing artificial harmonic patterns designed to map American detection capabilities. What NORAD had interpreted as routine Soviet bomber training exercises were actually intelligence collection operations targeting the frequency monitoring system. The strategic implications extended beyond compromised early warning. Soviet commanders now possessed detailed knowledge of American air defense procedures, alert protocols, and response timelines. They understood exactly which electromagnetic signatures triggered maximum NORAD reactions, How long American interceptor squadrons required to achieve combat readiness, and which approach vectors generated the most effective defensive responses. The frequency detection system had become a window into American strategic thinking that Soviet war planners could exploit during actual conflict. By September, Soviet Tu-95 operations had decreased dramatically as bomber crews apparently received new operational guidelines designed to minimize their electromagnetic signatures. The few formations that approached North American airspace flew with modified flight profiles, altered engine synchronization settings that reduced propeller harmonic emissions and made frequency detection significantly more difficult. Soviet engineers were systematically eliminating the vulnerability that Watson had discovered. Watson's technical analysis revealed something the Soviet countermeasures had overlooked. The Tu-95's electromagnetic emissions were hardwired into its fundamental design architecture. The massive contra-rotating propellers that generated the distinctive harmonic patterns were integral to the aircraft's unprecedented range and payload capabilities. Silencing those signatures completely would require comprehensive redesign of the entire propulsion system, modifications that would take years to implement and cost billions of rubles to retrofit across the Soviet strategic bomber fleet. More significantly, Watson realized that Soviet attempts to mask their electromagnetic signatures were creating new detection opportunities. Every countermeasure produced additional electromagnetic anomalies that were actually easier to identify than the original propeller harmonics. When Soviet pilots attempted to synchronize their contra-rotating propellers to reduce harmonic interference, the mechanical precision required generated distinctive frequency patterns that appeared nowhere else in the electromagnetic spectrum. The breakthrough came during October, when Watson developed what he termed Signature Analysis version 2.0. Instead of monitoring the Tu-95's natural electromagnetic emissions, his enhanced system focused on detecting Soviet efforts to suppress those emissions. The harder Soviet crews tried to mask their signatures, the more visible they became to Watson's refined detection protocols. Watson's new approach exploited fundamental principles of electromagnetic interference that Soviet engineers apparently hadn't considered. Contra-rotating propellers generated harmonic patterns through mechanical interactions that couldn't be eliminated without stopping the propellers entirely. Any attempt to modify those patterns through engine synchronization or flight profile changes created secondary electromagnetic effects that were actually more detectable than the original signatures. Testing of the enhanced detection system began in November using modified equipment at 3 DW line stations. Watson's Signature Analysis 2.0 achieved remarkable results during its first operational trials. 98% accuracy in detecting Soviet bomber approaches with 8 to 10 hours of advance warning. The system could identify individual aircraft attempting to mask their electromagnetic emissions and track formation changes in real time as Soviet pilots modified their countermeasure techniques. The strategic advantage proved even more overwhelming than Watson's original frequency detection system. Soviet bombers attempting to penetrate North American airspace using electronic warfare countermeasures became easier to track than formations flying with standard operational procedures. NORAD could monitor Soviet electronic warfare experiments, analyze their countermeasure effectiveness, and develop countermeasures faster than Soviet technical specialists could implement new deception methods. Colonel Mitchell authorized expanded implementation of Watson's enhanced system across the Northern Tier Air Defense Network during December. The frequency monitoring protocol now covered electromagnetic signatures ranging from suppressed propeller harmonics to active countermeasure emissions, providing comprehensive coverage of Soviet strategic bomber operations regardless of their electronic warfare techniques. By year's end, Watson's Signature Analysis system had achieved something unprecedented in Cold War intelligence operations: the ability to track enemy strategic forces more effectively when they attempted to evade detection than when they operated normally. Soviet bomber crews found themselves trapped between two equally compromising alternatives: fly with standard procedures and be detected by Watson's original frequency monitoring, or attempt countermeasures and be tracked even more precisely by his enhanced Signature Analysis system. The December operational trials demonstrated the system's strategic value during a major Soviet exercise involving 24 Tu-95s approaching from multiple vectors. Watson's enhanced detection protocols tracked every aircraft from takeoff at Siberian bases through Arctic approach routes to simulated target areas in northern Canada. The monitoring capability provided NORAD with complete intelligence on Soviet bomber doctrine, flight procedures, and electronic warfare techniques that would prove invaluable throughout the remainder of the Cold War. The quiet period that followed the December exercises masked a fundamental shift in the strategic balance between American air defense and Soviet bomber operations. Throughout January and February of 1960, Soviet long-range aviation units maintained minimal activity levels, conducting only essential training flights that remained well within international airspace boundaries. Intelligence analysts at NORAD headquarters interpreted this reduction as evidence that Soviet commanders had abandoned strategic bomber operations in favor of intercontinental ballistic missile development. Watson understood the situation differently. His enhanced signature analysis system revealed that Soviet bomber crews were conducting intensive electromagnetic countermeasure experiments during their reduced flight operations. The few Tu-95 formations that approached North American detection zones showed increasingly sophisticated attempts at propeller synchronization designed to minimize harmonic emissions. Soviet technical specialists were systematically testing every possible method for reducing their aircraft's electromagnetic visibility. The technical challenge facing Soviet engineers was more complex than American intelligence analysts realized. The Tu-95's contra-rotating propeller system represented a fundamental aerodynamic compromise between range, payload, and speed that couldn't be modified without completely redesigning the aircraft. The massive 8-blade propellers were precisely engineered to operate at specific rotational speeds that maximized fuel efficiency during long-range strategic missions. Any attempt to synchronize the propellers perfectly would reduce engine performance and limit the bomber's operational capabilities. Watson's analysis of Soviet countermeasure attempts revealed something even more strategically significant. Every modification Soviet pilots made to their engine operations created new electromagnetic anomalies that were easier to detect than the original propeller harmonics. When bomber crews attempted to match their contra-rotating propeller speeds, the mechanical precision required generated distinctive frequency patterns that appeared nowhere else in the electromagnetic spectrum. The harder Soviet forces tried to hide, the more visible they became to Watson's refined detection protocols. The revelation transformed Watson's understanding of electromagnetic warfare principles. Traditional detection systems focused on identifying known signatures, specific radar reflections, radio emissions, or infrared heat sources that indicated enemy presence. Watson's signature analysis approach inverted this concept by monitoring attempts to suppress detectable characteristics. The countermeasures themselves became the primary intelligence indicators, providing more reliable detection than the original phenomena they were designed to mask. Implementation of Watson's countermeasure detection system began in March with installation of advanced frequency analysis equipment at 12 primary DUW line stations. The new protocol could distinguish between natural atmospheric interference, electronic warfare jamming attempts, and authentic Soviet propeller suppression efforts with unprecedented precision. Each type of electromagnetic activity displayed unique characteristics that Watson's operators learned to identify within minutes of initial contact. The system's effectiveness became apparent during a major Soviet training exercise in April, when long-range aviation units attempted to conduct stealth approach missions using their most advanced countermeasure techniques. 28 Tu-95 bombers launched from bases across Siberia, each aircraft employing different electronic warfare methods designed to test American detection capabilities. Watson's signature analysis system tracked every formation from initial engine startup through complete mission profiles, achieving 100% detection accuracy with an average advance warning time of 9.4 hours. The strategic implications were devastating for Soviet bomber doctrine. Their most sophisticated countermeasure techniques not only failed to evade American detection, but actually made their aircraft easier to track than conventional operations. Soviet bomber crews found themselves in an impossible tactical situation. They could be detected using Watson's original frequency monitoring system if they flew normally, or tracked even more precisely using his enhanced signature analysis if they attempted electronic warfare countermeasures. NORAD's response demonstrated how completely Watson's detection capabilities had transformed continental air defense strategy. Air Defense Command could now position interceptor squadrons along predicted Soviet approach routes hours before enemy bombers reached international airspace boundaries. F-106 Delta Dart fighters launched from Elmendorf, Keflavik, and Goose Bay achieved intercept positions that allowed them to shadow Soviet formations throughout their entire approach profiles, maintaining visual contact from distances that conventional radar systems could never provide. The psychological impact on Soviet bomber crews became evident through communications intelligence collected by National Security Agency monitoring stations. Intercepted radio transmissions revealed growing frustration among Tu-95 pilots who understood that their missions were being tracked by American forces but couldn't determine how their stealth techniques were being defeated. Soviet electronic warfare specialists tested increasingly desperate countermeasure combinations without realizing that each new attempt provided Watson's system with additional detection opportunities. General Hayes authorized expansion of the signature analysis system to cover the entire North American air defense network during May. The frequency monitoring protocol now included installations from Alaska to Nova Scotia, providing comprehensive electromagnetic surveillance of all possible Soviet bomber approach routes. The system's detection range extended so far beyond conventional radar coverage that NORAD possessed complete strategic warning of enemy bomber operations from initial takeoff through final mission completion. Watson's promotion to Master Sergeant came with assignment to NORAD headquarters at Cheyenne Mountain, where he supervised integration of signature analysis capabilities into America's permanent air defense architecture. His electromagnetic detection system had evolved from a curious technical experiment at a remote Arctic station into the cornerstone of continental defense strategy. The frequency monitoring protocols developed at DEW Line Station POW-3 now protected American airspace with capabilities that Soviet strategic planners couldn't counter or evade. The strategic balance had shifted decisively in America's favor through one radar operator's curiosity about empty radio frequencies that weren't supposed to contain anything important. Soviet bomber operations had been transformed from surprise threats requiring immediate response to predictable activities that American air defense forces could anticipate, track, and counter with overwhelming tactical superiority throughout every phase of potential enemy missions. Watson often reflected on how his discovery had originated from the simple decision to monitor electromagnetic spectrum that other operators ignored as irrelevant noise. The revolution in air defense capability had emerged from questioning conventional assumptions about what frequencies deserved attention during routine surveillance operations. Sometimes the most significant breakthroughs came from paying attention to details that established doctrine considered unimportant.